You write, to my father, who lost the use of his tongue from his stroke and taught me how to listen without words.
He was in a stroke unit for the best part of 6 weeks, but he couldn't use his tongue, which meant he couldn't swallow, meant he couldn't form speech. We assume that listening's all about what's said, and I think we can learn a lot more from what the face is telling us. You can hear a lot from looking into people's eyes. It's when people pause and take the time to reflect and maybe consider what they want to say rather than what they have said. It's a really big difference. If you could code how you listen, you could change the world.
Oscar, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters. You have written a book, and when the book landed on my desk, it was interesting because how to listen. I'm thinking, okay, we all listen every day, and I got into it, and it's a really, really fascinating read. I'd like to start really actually with the quote that opens your book, which is, you write, to my father, who lost the use of his tongue from his stroke and taught me how to listen without words. And that's a very, very powerful statement. So what happened, and how did you get this epiphany?
Yeah, well, my dad having a stroke stopped this book number 3 being written. I had to go back to the publisher and go, my dad's had a stroke. It was October 2021. And Dad was in a stroke unit. He kind of was slurring his words when I was talking to him on the phone. So I got my sister to call. She said the same thing. So I went out there. My sister lives in a state. And it wasn't in a very good way. And he was in a stroke unit for the best part of 6 weeks. And with this stroke, he pretty much lost use of his left side, his leg and his hand. But he couldn't use his tongue, which meant he couldn't swallow, meant he couldn't form speech. And you have to remember at this time in the hospital he was in, all the nurses that were specialists for the stroke unit had been moved into the COVID wards.
Right.
And the nursing ratios went from 1 to 4, 1 nurse for every 4 patients, to 1 to 10. So it was quite chaotic. But in my dad's eyes, because he couldn't speak, he couldn't form words, you could see fear and frustration and anxiety. And we figured out a system. And the system was squeeze my hand once for no. We had originally gone squeeze my hand once for yes, but you probably say no to more things because people have either a positive or negative orientation in the way they speak. And my dad was definitely no kind of person, more a negative kind of person. So he had to drink thickened water. I mean, is that a thing? Yeah. Right? So he had a straw and he had thickened water, and there was a speech therapist who came in twice a day to help him kind of get there. And I guess 2 things shone for me. One is you can hear a lot from looking into people's eyes. Your eyes give away so much when you can't speak. Even though my dad couldn't speak, he could make noise that would indicate the intensity of pain or lack of pain or frustration and all those things. So for someone who makes a living listening to people, this was a gift. I mean, Dad was in then a rehab hospital for another 9 weeks and then a respite care for another 4 weeks. And eventually in January, he gets home. Now, he's okay. He's got care around him. He's got me, my auntie and a cousin who help out, as well as some carers. But I think for many of us, we assume that listening's all about what's said. And I think we can learn a lot more from what the face is telling us.
Mm. Yeah, that's very true. And they do say that communication, something like only 7% of it is the words that are said, right? The rest is all about the body language and everything else, the tonality, the pitch, the actual order of the words, all sorts of other patterns go into that, not just the words themselves.
Yeah, and my favorite bit of misquoted research, Morabian, who that quote and percentage is often attributed to, said, for people in relationships, meaning you know the person. For if you're meeting someone for the first time in a business context, that may not be true. So
Yes.
don't balance out the words as well as the speech, 50-50, I would say.
Which kind of goes back to how to listen, right? Because it's not just that you got to look at the full context, not just the little soundbite that comes out of that.
Yeah, and I think zooming back into the hospital with Dad, I think one of the things I'm grateful for is Corinne Janssen out of the Netherlands. She's also a listening professional, but she works inside the medical system. She's in a hospital as a chief listening officer. So she's just there as an advocate for patients. She's there as an advocate for people who can't speak, basically. And I explained the situation to her that I was getting frustrated because the nursing staff, the allied services staff, the neurologists are all talking to me, not to my dad, like as if he's just a lump of meat on a bed. And she taught me something very profound. She said, as soon as they walk into the ward, you go and get your face as close as possible to your dad. And when they make eye contact, they won't be able to help but be looking at your father. And I said, oh, I'm curious about that technique. And she said, patients recover faster when they feel they're in control, when they feel they're being spoken to, when they feel they're being communicated to, when they feel like they're part of their own recovery, rather than something that's being imposed on them. And I think whether that's children, whether that's grandparents, whether that's managers at work, whether that's employees, whether that's students in a student-teacher relationship, a lot can be said for communicating to someone as if they can move along on the journey with you rather than you pointing out the direction for them to go in, maybe through some third party. You know, as we got home in January, Sanjay, I must tell you this funny story. So Dad's basically been out of home for the best part of 3 months, and we're driving home from the respite care. And I said, what's the first thing you want to do when we get you home? He says, I want to be the Pope. I said, oh, you want to be the Pope? He says, what does that mean? He goes, oh, I want to bend over and kiss the ground when I get to my home. But I'm worried that if I bend over and kiss the ground, I won't get up again. So maybe I won't be doing that straight away. So, yeah, good on him. He's kind of got a bit of a sense of humor about how his recovery went. But, you know, he also taught me resilience. He showed me what determination is. He showed me the value of very small incremental improvements every day. And he often asked me to hijack the patient next to him. His name was Ian. He was 90 and Ian wouldn't eat his custard. He hated chocolate custard, but my dad did. So it was my job to get it off Ian's bench before the nurses came in to clean up the dinner.
Right.
So a good day, Dad got 2 chocolate custards. So that was a good day for him.
Yeah, that would be a good day for me as well. I like chocolate custard. Well, I probably haven't had it since my school days when I start to think about it. It was quite common in school, but not so much now. So I hope your dad has made a good recovery now and is got back to some sort of normality around his life. How did you actually start in your listening career?
Oh, look, I think there's plenty of places you could start. Could have started at school, where I enjoyed the company of 23 other nationalities, post-war Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, war-torn parts of South America, and people fleeing behind the Iron Curtain from Poland, Lithuania, Yugoslavia. Made for great lunch swaps. You could have some of the most exotic food. But apart from football unifying everybody, there was a card game that was an Italian card game played in our school during our lunch hour. And by the way, I don't have another language. They all spoke in their home language, and this game is played in pairs diagonally opposite. And they always play in their home language and get very confident. And occasionally somebody's missing from the other team, so I was the player who was the substitute. And me and my counterpart would be speaking in English. The trouble is when you speak in your home language, there's a confidence that the other person doesn't understand what's going on. I was watching the fingers on the cards. I was watching how high and wide their eyes were lighting up. I was looking at the interplay between the two players, and that often got confused. That was the first time I think I got taught to listen for body language because I didn't have the language that they were using. You go into my corporate career, I was renowned as a leader for having all my monthly team meetings inside a contact center where everybody had to listen for an hour before the team meeting to real live customers coming in and listening to what their problems are. Now, they weren't the call center agent solving it. They were just there to hear the problem. And then in 2008, and I'm in a budget meeting, one of these intergalactic set-piece boardroom setups between Sydney, Seattle, and Singapore. I was a marketing director at Microsoft in Australia at the time, and this piece of theatre known as the budget setting process. We've got 18 people. Half of those people are accountants and business analysts who are doing very unnatural things to excel, to bend the numbers to their will. At the 20-minute mark, my vice president, my boss in the room in Sydney, looked me straight in the eye and she said, "Oscar, we need to talk immediately after this meeting." And I think it's a big lesson for anybody who's communicating. The minute Tracy said that, I stopped listening. And all I was trying to do was figure out how many weeks of salary I've got left and who are the 5 people I need to call, because she's never said that to me before and I'm certainly going to get fired. Meeting finishes. I try and get out. Tracy says, "Please close the door. Make sure no one can get in. What I have to tell you is really important." I'm going, great. I'm halfway back from closing the door to walking towards Tracy at this big, long boardroom table. And she says, "You have no idea what you did at the 20-minute mark, do you?" And I thought, oh, great. I'm getting fired and I don't even know why. And I sat down and she said, "If you could code how you listen, you could change the world." Okay. What I heard was, "Woo-hoo, I haven't been fired."
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the match that lit the spark that's got, over 35,000 people in our research database, our jigsaw puzzle game, 4 books, a lot of research, and many, 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 many interviews with some of the best listeners in the world. So that's probably where the launch pad happened. But I think all the fueling and the setup of the rocket is just accumulation of a whole bunch of things that a nerdy little introvert got really good at listening.
What was it that she noticed that you did at the 20-minute mark that was that point?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I probably told that story over 500 times. And it's incredibly rare that people ask the follow-up question that you're asking. In fact,
right,
you'd become number 9 out of over 500. So well done. What was happening is everybody was positioning their number. You need this revenue number for this product set for this kind of growth. And everybody was just literally talking over the top of each other. And I invited a pause and I just asked everybody, could you declare your assumptions, at least the top 3, before you throw out a number? Which they didn't need to listen to me, yet they did. And it was the dialogue about the assumptions, not the dialogue about the number, that helped the group to come much faster to a common understanding. Maybe not a common number, maybe not a common agreed number, but at least all of a sudden there was at least 2 variables. We've been compared to Canada on one variable and the Netherlands on another, which GDP roughly the same, Canada geographically roughly the same, except they border on the world's largest economy, so not the same.
Yeah.
Netherlands over-indexing on financial services and a very small group of global multinational beer makers and Philips and these kinds of companies. So once we started to explain to them that half of Australia's GDP is made up by local, state, and federal governments who aren't growth companies, all of a sudden the conversation changed. So,
right,
I think too many people in working life kind of answer the question they're asked rather than check and clarify, like you just did, to go, okay, what's that about? Because in that you get tighter understanding, you increase the closeness of the relationship because you care to ask, and you probably get discretionary effort from both parties or both groups or both meetings or both organizations by just taking that time to be curious a little bit longer.
It kind of goes back to one of Stephen Covey's habits, right? Seek first to understand and then to be understood, which is, you go into a budget meeting, you've been told you need to kind of get your budget approved or whatever. So you're going in to justify your number rather than saying, actually, let me help you understand how this number came about, which is the question you asked, really, right? What were the assumptions? And therefore the understanding comes along, and therefore then you get a better, more richer conversation rather than a bonfire over whose budget was right and who deserves more marketing dollars versus someone else.
And for those of you listening who can't see, we just got a beautiful example of somebody explaining a lived experience with a much more animated and vocally variant description than, as Stephen Covey says, which was very monotoned and pulled out of something that Sanchez read. These are the things you want to be listening out for, because I sense there was a real experience in that for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. There's
and many
times.
Yes.
Many times. And having come from a sales background, having come from a background where, you're told to sell this thing or to, this is the current product offer we've got or whatever, you go into a meeting pitching that product rather than stopping and saying, well, why should my customer even care about this product? What's in it for them? Why would they need to think about this product? And when you start a narrative along those lines, you get an outcome, which maybe you're not selling that product, but you are selling something else, or you're making a richer kind of conversation and relationship. So yes, many years of experience in that, Oscar, of not seeking to understand and, just trying to go in there and offering something as a sales background. And you yourself have had a sales background, right? So you'll be familiar with that kind of approach.
Yeah, and one of the things you don't know about me is I have dyscalculia, which is I switch numbers around, right? So if you say to me 918, I'll probably write 189 or 981. I get them around the wrong way. And it's ironic because my first profession, the graduate career I got into, was accounting. And it took 6 weeks for my manager to figure out this thing and asked me at lunchtime to write down 20 telephone numbers, of which I got all the numbers completely correct. 16 of them were in the right order and 4 were not.
Right.
So my career in accounting was over. My point is very simple. if your career is in sales, make friends with the finance people in your organization, because at the end of every proposal, at the end of every sales presentation, sits either a finance committee, a capital allocation committee, a program office, which has got finance people on it. They can help you speak in a language that will be heard, not by the person you're necessarily presenting to, but the person in finance they ultimately have to present to. So a phrase I was famous for, it's not our job to beat the competition. It's our job to get the business case through for finance in the customer. Because you can beat the competition, yet you can lose to toilet paper, because the people selling toilet paper to your organization that you're trying to sell to, maybe you're selling them technology, maybe you're selling them consulting, but maybe the finance person just got a great deal on a buy a year's worth of toilet paper and get a 25% discount. All of a sudden you've lost the money that might have been allocated to what you sell. So listening to the business case is crucial.
Yeah,
I want to listen beyond the words in sales.
very, very much so. And it also goes back to assumptions. Don't make assumptions. And one of my previous guests, Charlotte, she just actually posted on LinkedIn this morning about assumptions are like dust. They build up. You have to sweep them away from time to time, right? To start. And I thought that was a great metaphor for how
assumptions are like rain on your windscreen. Occasionally you need to use the windscreen wipers.
Perfect. There you go. So how did you go about codifying listening skills?
Well, the good news is I didn't. I decided that I would just listen to the people I was consulting to. So I'll give you a simple example. One of the coding, and what we tried to do is code the best listening, not my listening. A really important difference for Tracy as well. We're in a workshop and there was a whole lot of sticky notes that we've been using about what's the cost of not listening in this organization. And it was from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. It was a half-day workshop. And so we had a break about halfway through, around 3 o'clock. And I just asked everybody to go out of the building and get some sunlight on their body. However, when you got sunlight on your body, 5 minutes and then come back in. And I was taking photos of all these sticky notes and I had to adjust one to line it up so I could put it in a presentation once the photo was taken. And as I did that, one of the workshop participants, she said to me, "Oscar, don't touch my note." It's like, wow, there's a lot of importance being placed on this 3M sticky note. And it got me really curious. Anyway, I was talking to my book editor who's been with me since the first book. And I said, "Kel, this is what happened." And she goes, "Oscar, you dork, make playing cards." So she could translate this meaning making that had been put on this sticky note by somebody. It's my card. And she said, make them into playing cards. So through listening and that situation, we started and we developed 50 playing cards organized all along the 5 levels of listening with a technique, a question, and a context to use it in. So you use it in one-on-one, you use it in a group meeting, you use it in a virtual meeting, all these kinds of things. So that was one kind of coding. Another kind of coding came about where a chair said to me, we'd finished the workshop, and the chair said to me, "Oscar, great job. Unfortunately, only half the job. And I'm not going to pay you for the second half." And I'm kind of scratching my head and I go, "Second half? What's he talking about? I've done the workshop. There was no other thing in the proposal." He said, "Oscar, this is great. You can do this for board meetings, but I want you to create a survey so everyone can understand they're listening without you being there." And I said, "A survey?" And he goes, "Think of it as a questionnaire. Think of it as an assessment, but you will know 20 questions you can ask us, because I've been watching how you work the room. Put that into some software and give people something valuable, like a report about what to do about it, because you can't be everywhere. It's like, yeah, I can't be everywhere. Yeah, that's right. So I'm very grateful. By listening to that, we worked with a market research company, then we worked with a software development company where we have 20 questions, listeningquiz.com, where you can ask that, answer the questions, and you get a tailored report based on your primary and secondary listening barriers and what to do about it. And that's another way we've kind of coded listening so that people can discover that. And often people take the assessment before the workshop that we run, whether that's online or face-to-face, and they say, oh, I've already started doing that X, whatever the technique is for them. I want to come to the workshop and learn the advanced stuff now. And I said, well, settle down. We want to consolidate the basics, but that's great to hear that you've already got value out of that. And people don't think about a book as a coding of listening, but all the books have kind of coded that. And the next book we're working on is How to Listen, Executive Edition, how do boards and executive teams listen to each other. So that's where we're going next in the coding of how to listen. I'm curious, when you hear me say that, there's a example where I think coding how to listen is really bad. So I'd love your reaction on this.
Okay.
There's this software phenomenon called AI. They who shall not be named. Today, there are software companies that sell contact center software based on what the customer says to the person on the phone, will real time attempt to coach the person based on what they heard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the listening level and communication effectiveness of all these AI tools are really coded right now between the age of 10 and 15 years of age. They really haven't mastered somebody who's been in a workplace in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s and beyond. So I'm curious, why would an organization impose that kind of technology to distract the person who's actually talking to another human? Because you wouldn't put a teenager in a sales situation. I'm just curious, when you hear that, what's going on?
That's a very strong question, and it's a little bit like when you're having a conversation and you've got someone talking in your ear. How do you actually concentrate on what's being said, right?
Mm.
And okay, a call center is a little bit different. You're just focusing on the voice, not the rest of the body language, right? You're not seeing the person, you're not seeing the eyes or the hands, but clearly you're listening to the intonation of the voice and how the voice is mapping. And so, yes, AI tools, they have a role to play. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I was a contact center agent having an AI tool telling me what the next step is or the next best thing to say in response to something. But an AI tool that can help to understand that person is maybe getting frustrated with me and I'm not necessarily picking up on that and therefore changing the approach I'm taking, that I could see very powerfully, right? That could certainly be there. And of course, tools are currently not necessarily AI tools, but tools are used today to validate that you are who you say you are, right? So Oscar, when you phone your bank, they will have a tool in the background that's listening to your voice and checking for voice patterns to make sure that it is you, that you're not talking under duress, that you're not doing these sorts of things. So I see the value of tools, but I wouldn't.
But can the tool distinguish between Oscar Trimboli and Oscar Trimboli?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Are they that good at the moment? I don't see any evidence where that's the case. Second one, much frustrated compared to the first, right?
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, if you're in an organization that's trying to impose technologies on people that are much too immature, just remember human-to-human connections is how businesses and organizations thrive, because technology doesn't drive change. It enables it. People drive change, and
Yes.
always has been, always will be.
And that's the value of face-to-face meetings as an example. It's great that we can talk via technology, that we can have a great experience. But unless when you meet someone and you see the full body, not just the head and shoulders, and you have that interaction, it's such a different experience that, especially in a sales kind of environment where that ability to connect is much stronger in person than it is in a virtual space like this.
Mm-hmm.
Which goes back to listening, right? Listening across not just the words, but the whole experience, right? The whole person, rather than just the things that are being said.
Is there anything in particular you've noticed in the last 20 minutes about the way I'm communicating to you that surprised you?
You are pausing a lot more than most people do. Most people, and it goes back to, again, this is things I'm kind of coming up with all these kind of sayings here. People listen to respond rather than listening to hear, and that's evident in you, that you're listening to hear rather than listening to respond. I am listening to respond because I'm a host of a podcast. I'm actually thinking about what my next question will be, which is probably incorrect. However, that's kind of where my head is at the moment.
Yeah, and I think as the host of anything, it's not what your next question could be. It's what do you think the next question the audience has got on the tip of their tongue.
Yeah.
I know you've had another guest ask a question as well.
Yes, I have indeed. So as we go into that, let me ask you the question that my previous guest asked, which is, and I shall read it out to you. Think of a time in your youth that was a watershed moment. What would your adult self say to your child self now?
Just repeat the question again.
So think of a time in your youth that was a watershed moment. What would your adult self say to your child self now?
I think the watershed moment was getting braces.
Okay.
For most people, braces around their teeth are there to straighten teeth. If you can visualize a fist distance from your teeth, that's how far my jaw was protruding. So I had a werewolf jaw and a huge overbite. So most people get braces for 12 to maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years. I had it for 5 because I had to literally pull it back. Now I'm really grateful. I've got a great smile. And in that time, I learned to ask great questions. I didn't know that at the time. So I just didn't want anybody looking at me and my braces. And so the best way to do that was to ask them questions and get their own attention back onto themselves. And in that practice of getting people to talk about themselves, I became very good at asking kinds of questions that people responded to and equally listened to what they say so I could build on that for the follow-up. So today, Oscar would say to 15-year-old Oscar, no matter what obstacle gets in your way, that's a really important opportunity to build resilience and muscles in a way that other people will never get the chance to because they haven't encountered this hurdle. They haven't encountered this difficulty. So well done for picking up a new skill, and well done for building on top of that is what Oscar in his 50s would say to Oscar in his 15s.
Wow. Was that quite a traumatic, not necessarily traumatic, maybe that's just a stronger word, but in terms of having that, jaw issue, did that affect your confidence? Did that affect how you felt you were viewed in the world and how you viewed the world at the time before you had all the treatment to adjust that?
it definitely didn't affect my confidence because I didn't know if I was confident or not. So
Right.
whether I was playing football or whether I was studying, like none of that was affected by how I looked or how I perceived how other people might look at me. Like my dad always says, you're never going to be the smartest in the room all the time, but you can always be the hardest working. So I applied that consistently as well. So no, I don't think I lack confidence because I was just trying to get a little bit better at whatever I did every day, whether that was marks at school or so. I think the opposite is true. I don't think I was confident in myself. I was confident in my ability to learn,
Mm-hmm.
but equally, I wasn't in comparison. And I think that's because I think I had so many things going on in my life. I had, working, I had school work, I had sport work, I had all these extracurricular things. I don't think I had time to lack confidence because I was too busy doing other things to be really introspective, unless that there was that situation at a family function where an adult wanted to have a conversation with me. That's the time where I felt like, okay, I need to get the spotlight back on them rather than me. So amongst my peers, no, I don't think I had a dent in my confidence, nor do I think I was overconfident because growing up in 23 different nationalities and lots of migrants, you get told lots of stories by the previous generation of migrants about why you don't belong and all these other things. So it was easy to get knocked around and not to kind of worry about those things.
No, that's fair enough. So as you know, this podcast series is called Success Matters. What does success mean to you, Oscar?
It's knowing the difference between more and enough, whether that's got to do with work, whether that's got to do with money, whether that's got to do with how long you spend going in one particular direction and problem solving. I think I was fortunate enough to be given this gift about 10 years ago where I was literally trying to do too many things all at once. Remember, my dad said, you never be the smartest, you can always be the hardest working. That's true to a point. But even being the hardest working all the time has got some consequences. So for me, success is knowing when it's enough rather than continuously striving for more.
Okay. So what sort of metrics or what sort of measures would you say you've put in place to say that's enough and I don't need more?
I think metrics is a really good example of more rather than enough.
Okay.
I literally use that mantra for myself. Like, I'll give you a simple example. With the community of practice that's working around and with me, we call ourselves the Deep Listening Ambassadors. And the Deep Listening Ambassadors set this quest for 100 million deep listeners in the workplace. Now, I could get incredibly obsessed about measuring that. I could get incredibly obsessed about how do we get more. But for me, it's how do we do that in a sustainable way where everybody can do enough rather than keep on wanting more. I have no metrics around it whatsoever, and I'm super comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's very common. I think you're right. Metrics are very much linked to more, right? Because people say, oh, if I had more X or if I could get to this point, then there'd be a transformation. But actually, you probably can do the transformation without getting to that point or have a different life or whatever it is you're trying to, change in the world around you. So it's a good point. And by metrics, I suppose, also comes to the world that I'm in, right, which is corporate world in KPIs, and therefore metrics are all around you all the time and almost program you to work to the metric. Which is actually part of why I set up Success Matters, because I'm programmed to a metric. So success is not about the metric; it's about other things.
Yeah, and I speculate a lot of those corporate metrics are poorly thought through and create counterproductive behavior that gets you business situations like Enron and lots of fraud.
Yeah.
That gets you situations where safety of people and environments is compromised, like the BP Deepwater Horizon oil rig.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we put as much effort into the quality of the metric rather than the numerator on the metric, we probably need fewer metrics, but more well thought out metrics. Because I suspect in your long-term career, more than half of those metrics were completely ineffective and didn't drive the behavior that they thought to, because there were opposite metrics that were counterbalancing them. Grow revenue profitably, get market share profitably. All these things that we just need to be cautious of, that if there is that much precision in the metric, this probably isn't as well thought through consequences in those metrics.
That's very, very good point. I'm sure many listeners will relate to that, that the metrics that they have versus the metrics that maybe another department has or maybe another division has are often not congruent, right, with the ultimate goal for that corporation or organization. So, Oscar, do you have a question for my next guest?
How do you listen to what's not said?
Oh, that's a good one. How do you listen to what's not said? And is there as you say that, and I'm pausing, I'm thinking back to the bit about the assumptions as well, because when there's that piece about listening to what's not said, sometimes you put your own assumptions into place to say, oh, they didn't say that, so this means this, or this is an element of projecting your own into that space, which is I don't know, maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, but there's a risk of doing that.
Yes, and a commercial break from neuroscience, that the speed at which you think and the speed at which you speak can be between 10 and 15 times faster.
Mm-hmm.
So the speed at which you think, roughly 1,000 words in a minute.
Yeah.
And if you've done more advanced study or you've been in the field for an extended period of time, it could be 1,600 words per minute. Yet you can speak at between 125 to 150 words per minute. So the first thing you say is definitely not all you're thinking. It's definitely not what you mean. If you take the time to listen to what's not said, meetings paradoxically are shorter. Relationships are stronger because we're discussing what matters earlier in the conversation. Most people are focused on listening to what's said, back to that Covey statement, listen to understand versus listen to respond. If you read that full chapter in his book, he talks about a time where he did that really, really poorly with one of his kids. So he was as guilty of it as anybody else. But it's when people pause and take the time to reflect and maybe consider what they want to say rather than what they have said. It's a really big difference. And the same is true in sales environments, and the same is true in project management environments, and the same is true in engineering environments. People will use, if you listen to them carefully, they will use coded language. They will use phrases like, actually, what I meant to say was, now that I think about it a little longer, I should have told you this. And it will always be preceded by an intake of breath, because they're centering themselves around what it means to them, and then they say what they think. So my question for the next guest is, how do you listen for what's not said?
Okay, great. Well, Oscar, we're at the top of our time now. It's been a very fascinating conversation, and I've certainly learned a lot in the process of our brief 30, 40-minute conversation. If people want to find out more or get in contact with you, what's the best chance for them to do so?
Look, I'd love you to get in contact with me, but I'd rather you got in contact with your own listening. It's going to be more useful for you. So if you visit listeningquiz.com, you can take the 20-question assessment. You can get a report of 5 pages that'll tell you your primary and secondary listening barriers or what to do about it. On that report, you'll get all my contact details as well. But I'd rather you got something valuable rather than merely just connecting with me. Don't get me wrong, I'd love you to connect with me. There's only one Oscar Trimboli in the world that does listening. So if you really want to get in contact with me, that's how you can do it.
Cool. Great. Well, thank you very much, Oscar. We'll certainly put details of that up on the video and Spotify. So thank you very much for taking part in Success Matters.
Thanks for listening.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.